Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and everybody in between. Yesterday, I made a video talking about the new Georgenotfound allegations, in which a content creator by the name of Caitibugzz came forward with a 30-minute stream, where she comes forward with allegations of a content creator who had touched her in ways that she wasn't okay with at VidCon. She never explicitly gives details as to who it was, but the internet eventually started making connections that it was Georgenotfound. I made a video on this yesterday. That's essentially a really quick explanation of it all, but if you want to get the actual deep dive, you can watch that if you'd like. I'll link it somewhere up here. And after Caitibugzz video came out, Georgenotfound actually made a post on Twitter saying that he was going to be doing a very serious stream later that day, and then he was going to gather evidence and information to properly share with everyone what actually went down. And that stream ended up not happening. It took him more than 24 hours to finally go live, but as of today, he finally had that stream, and so I gave it a watch, and I'm going to break it down for you guys. And I'm not going to lie, before I actually gave the apology video a watch, I thought it was going to be absolutely awful, because if you go on Twitter and just look up Georgenotfound, most of the posts are about people being like, "We don't forgive you," saying things like electric chair, or that two creators that should meet up should be Georgenotfound and Too Mad. So everyone has not forgiven George. In fact, actually, it's come to the point that his actual subreddit is a Curious George fan subreddit now. Like, literally all the posts all the posts are about Curious George now, which I find kind of funny. But let's just dig into the human version of George's stream, where he covers the allegations himself. And the stream opens up with a 7.5-minute long screen that just says "Serious conversation. All ads and donations are turned off. No money is being made from this stream. It'll start soon." And this chat is very obviously locked in emote only mode because, I mean, be real with me, that chat would have been abhorrent to look at. So they're locked in Egyptian hieroglyph mode, spamming just people in prison and sad, crying, and angry faces. And also, I've seen people comment that they were getting ads on this VOD, even though the ads are turned off, supposedly, and they think George is lying to them. I don't think George is lying. I think Twitch is just the Mr. Krabs of real life and puts money on literally anything ever. I've even seen non-affiliated, non-monetized streamers have ads on their streams, so I think that explains that. And then George comes on the screen and just says basically, "Hey, I'm here live, hello, but I actually edited together my response, so I'm gonna play that now," because he didn't want to just do it all live. I get that, though. I mean, the same reason why Katie read off a script. It's kind of hard to cover these situations when live, because when you're live, your brain gets totally scrambled. When there's a chat flying by, there's stuff going on everywhere, so I get that. So I'm going to skip over the intro bit where he says hello, because it's not exactly relevant, and get immediately to where he starts responding to what Katie says directly.
One thing Katie said retrospectively, looking back at the scenario, is that I was flirting with her throughout the night and that she was uncomfortable with this because of our age difference. At the time, she was 18 and I was 26. She actually assumed I didn't know her age because she had never said it. But then later, I had actually DM'd her on Instagram. And because of this, she says that it is confirmed that I know her age. To give some context to this scenario and to why I didn't know her age, my perspective of things is that I am with people that are over the age of 21 in a scenario where we are doing things that people that are over the age of 21 are doing, like drinking. And also the people that came from an event where they had very heavy security. This was an official VidCon after party.
Now, that part actually does make kind of sense to a certain extent. The idea that he would assume that she was above the age of 21 when she's coming from an event that you need to be above the age of 21 to attend. However, you think that he'd be a little more thorough and look at her bio at least once if he's going to be DMing this girl. Like, you might look at her profile once or twice ever before sending a message. I don't know. I mean, we're different people, but if I were to be DMing someone, I'd look at their profile once or twice, even out of mere curiosity. But regardless, that's only the first thing. So let's get back to George and see what else he has to say. Oh, my bad. Wrong George. The actual George.
Instead of saying that her and the rest of her friends actually wanted to come to the hotel to hang out with us, she said that one friend was invited by Dream, but she didn't want to go alone. So then they decided to go along with her because they were willing to go anywhere. I just think it's important to note already that the story is slightly different from the reality of it. And I'll be mentioning this a few more times throughout the rest of the story. You can see in these screenshots from the text at the time that they were all trying to come to the hotel, and it wasn't just oh, we're willing to follow her, essentially.
Now, was this necessary to bring up in the response? Not really, but you know what it did do? It shined a light on the fact that Katie did withhold important details within the story, or at least change them slightly in her initial video, which is troubling to see. George also brings up a detail where Katie in her stream talks about the alcohol at the party as if it was being forced onto the girls there, and he shows screenshots where the girls were actually excited to drink and excited to party and play drinking games. I don't necessarily think that's a damning detail. I mean, everyone likes goofing around and having fun on occasion, so that's fine. However, I wish Katie would have explained it that way in the thing initially, because, I mean, if you were inappropriately touched in a way that you weren't comfortable with, the other details shouldn't even matter. The fact that you were inappropriately touched is the damning detail, which of course is what George is now going to be getting to because he brings up the couch in this next snippet.
So at this point, we then move to the couch. There was a couch in the room, and I sit next to Katie. Next, she says, this is a quote, resorted to playing games on her phone to avoid the awkward situation. Now, I just don't see how this is the case. She's implying that she is using her phone to essentially escape, such an awkward scenario that she's in. But that's just not how it happened. And this is why. She brought up the phone game as kind of a point. The game was honestly the central point of the interaction at this part of the night. It was a very social thing. She was passing the phone around. We were all playing the game and bantering about it, just having fun with the game. So I don't see how, she resorted to it and was using it in that context.
Now, I don't necessarily feel like her acting comfortable necessarily means she was comfortable. It's not necessarily a get out of jail free card that she was smiling and passing her phone around. It could have been that she might have turned on the game to hide away from the event, and then they were like, what are you doing? Let's play the game too. And then that got social again. But regardless, I also just feel like a lot of these details aren't exactly that necessary, because the thing he should be covering is the actual touching that went down, which of course is what he's about to be covering, so I'm gonna just skip over to that.
And we were cuddling together. We had been cuddling for, I'd say, around an hour at this point, playing the game, talking, and just having fun. And for clarity, I had my hand around her waist above her clothes. So with her statement where she's saying that she's resorting to playing games on her phone, I just don't really understand it, and I think that the picture that she's painting is really dark, when in reality she seemed very happy with the situation, was having a good time.
Now, it does seem like they're quite touchy and close throughout this party, but one of the details I think is important to point out is she seemed like she was happy. Now, unless George got himself an Elon Musk Neuralink, he doesn't exactly know what's going on inside of her head. So it could have been a situation where she was inwardly uncomfortable, but outwardly showing that she was fine because she didn't want to ruin the event for everyone else there. But of course, there's also the possibility that she was exaggerating a detail in her story, because we've seen it already before. But at the same time, so could George. Both of these people are singular people who are essentially creating solo propaganda for you to fall for them. And so you'll never actually have a solid, informed opinion on everything that's gone down unless you were actually there watching it happen. Which is why people who go and become keyboard warriors on Twitter always kind of irritate me, because they don't know. They're just getting mad at a situation that they theorize, like they're MatPat or something. But regardless, let's get into the next part where he talks about the more gritty details of what went down.
I'm just going to read the quote. She says, "Out of nowhere, I felt him slip his hand under my clothes, sitting next to me on the couch, in front of everyone. He disguised it with a simple, 'Are you ticklish?' I coughed out a no, and still staring at my phone, I was overly aware of the fact that we were in front of other people. The fact that everyone else was sitting around us, watching us, including my best friend, and that his hand was inching further to places I hadn't asked it to be. Again, as I mentioned before, we had previously been cuddling on this couch for around an hour, but I did place my hand on her waist under her shirt. The way it's phrased makes it sound like it just happened out of nowhere, when in reality we had been cuddling for over an hour at this point, and it was not out of nowhere."
Now, the way that Katie worded it did make it seem like it was happening faster than how it actually did, if George is telling the truth here. But her discomfort could have easily have been going down throughout the entire expanse of that block of time. We don't know. We weren't there. But I do see how the way she initially explained it could have been seen as a bit of a biased take. I wouldn't say manipulative. I can't think of the right word, but that's the first word that comes to my mind.
Before I continue, I want to make it clear that the furthest anything ever got was under the shirt touching and cuddling. Now, obviously, people don't typically ask if everything is okay, even such as touching someone's waist under their shirt before they do it.
Yeah, they do. That's what consent is.
But in this case, I was extremely slow, and she was engaging with me the entire time, laughing, cuddling with me, and even playfully fighting me for the game that we were playing.
Now, throughout watching both of these videos, it's been really difficult to form a solid, informed opinion on what actually went down in this hotel room that night. Because, of course, we're watching this through the perspective of two different people who clearly experienced this in vastly different ways. But the way that George adds in that detail about not having to usually ask consent before touching people is really weird, because that should be a common thing. And so I'm left with this thought of, like, I wonder if him doing this and the responses that she gave back were awkward responses and he just wasn't picking them up correctly. Because then he adds notes like this one.
Of course, I don't believe that silence is consent. I just want to make sure that it is abundantly clear. She was visibly and physically responding well to everything that we were doing.
Because with that, I'm starting to get the idea that I don't think George understands what silence is not consent means in the first place. Because the whole idea of consent is a two-way street. One person asks for consent and the other person says yes or no. So just the person giggling or just kind of like goofing around with it doesn't exactly mean, yes, I want you to put your hand in my shirt. But then he responds to the final point that Katie made about how when she left to go back to her apartment, they went into the elevator and George started to act like the elevator was broken to try and get her to get in it with her. And he explains this little point.
I did joke with her about coming in the elevator by pretending that it was broken. I went into the elevator, the doors closed, and I would press the doors open button to make it open again. I did this a few times, and she didn't go along with it, which I respectfully took, obviously.
Ah, I see, okay. You've got that weird-ass riz. Nah, but jokes aside, the fact that she didn't seem to go along with the joke that he was making clearly makes it obvious that she was not comfortable with the situation she was in. So it does kind of feed into the idea that they weren't on the same wavelength and she had been uncomfortable and he wasn't picking up on it. But then again, I don't know, because yet again, I was not there. And neither was anyone else who is going to comment on this or talking about it on Twitter. George then follows it up by commenting on the fact that he definitely doesn't think Katie's lying and that she's probably being honest about the fact that she was uncomfortable in the moment at the hotel. Which, of course, doesn't necessarily make the touching okay, but I'm happy that he does apologize explicitly for that and for making her uncomfortable. Like, I guess that's nice to see. But then he follows it up with this take that I think, like, really damages the accountability for the entire stream. And I'm not going to explain why. I'm going to show you and then we'll talk about it.
So now what I'm thinking is, why would she come out and say it like this? Why is she saying this? Now, I don't think she's purposefully being malicious or trying to hurt me or ruin my career or anything like that. But what I do think is that she is surrounded by a friend group that completely despises me and my friend group. And this is quite a specific scenario that probably doesn't really happen that much, especially publicly. So it's kind of weird. It's kind of hard to talk about it. But I think after VidCon, she obviously had told some of her friends about what happened. Whether or not that was in a negative connotation, I do not know. I wasn't part of these conversations, of course. But she clearly told them about this scenario. Now, when these people that are around you all completely despise me and my friends, they're obviously going to look on this poorly.
Now, George could have ended the stream after telling the story from his perspective in what I can only assume is a completely honest light, because the story completely checks out with Katie's, with the only difference being the way that they interpreted the event. But then you take the whole idea of this situation being just a misinterpretation and start to frame it as if they're attacking you because they're haters. I don't know, something about explaining the situation in a perfectly honest light and trying to clear your name up, but then turning it around to being a situation where they're just trying to cancel you because they hate you is really weird to me. Like, if you genuinely thought that was the reason she attacked you, you'd think that he would make more of the stream about that instead of just explaining it in an honest light and then pivoting to that at the very end. It feels kind of disingenuous and is honestly one of the big reasons why people are probably so angry about this online. In fact, some of the tweets that I had seen before watching this stream actually were mostly about the fact that he was trying to disregard this entire situation as just being haters attacking his community, which, I mean, after watching it, I didn't really know what they were talking about until that last part played, and I was like, ah, man, dude, you were doing fine until then. Now, since George's stream had happened, Dream actually came forward with a Reddit post where he essentially explains his perspective from that event, as well as his takes on all of it, and I'm not gonna lie, he does defend Katie, while at the same time understanding some of the points that George makes in his video, which is essentially the same thing I did. Like, it's kind of the rational take to go forward and be like, hey, Katie was uncomfortable and we should understand that, while at the same time recognizing that George might have made a bad call, but maybe didn't know better. He doesn't understand consent, which is weird and should be talked about, but I don't think he should be put in an electric chair like some people think on Twitter. Now, I think this is going to be the end of what happened here. Katie did say she was going to give more information once George dropped his response, which is weird to withhold information in the first place, but regardless, I think this is going to be the end of it because George did really cover everything, and he also dropped DMs and evidence, so I don't see what else is missing here. So I'll hit the road for now. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for being amazing. Subscribe if you were new and like the video to catch me on your homepage more often, and I'll see you in whatever I make next. So stay beautiful, and as always, adios, arrivederci, goodbye, good night, and maybe avoid arguing about this on Twitter. It isn't really our place to. See you guys.